Aloha. Welcome to Live from NOIRLab at Gemini. My name is Jamika. I am an outreach assistant here at the International Gemini Observatory, a program of NSF's NOIRLab. Joining us today as moderator is Alyssa Leinani Losi. And today's science guest is graphic designer Joy Pollard. We want to thank all of you for joining us today. And for those of you who are looking forward to participating in the YouTube chat, Alyssa will be there as the moderator to take your questions and comments. Throughout the presentation, feel free to drop your comments there anytime, and Alyssa will be able to come in and share those comments and questions throughout, so don't hesitate. Also, if you have any questions on where to find our website or how to find related links to the information that'll be presented, we will put those in the video description at the end of the broadcast. So let's talk a little bit about Gemini. So thank you. So Gemini is a program of NSF's NOIRLab, and we are, as you know, Gemini as the twins. So we are a twin 8.1 meter diameter optical infrared telescope. Now we're located in two sites, of course, here on the summit of Mauna Kea, and also on north central Chile's Cerro Pachon, and for Gemini South. Now, each telescope has the same mirror. This is the diameter, again, of 8.1 meters, which is about 26.5 feet. Now, the advantage of having a telescope in each hemisphere is that the International Gemini Observatory is able to observe objects throughout the entire night sky. Feel free to learn more about us on our website, and we will have that link in the video description. So some recent highlights from Gemini, a little bit of news, and again, we will have the link to this press release in the video description. So here you have a really fantastic infographic, and this infographic is giving us a little bit of information about something pretty fantastic. So researchers have used the 8.1 meter Gemini North telescope to actually measure the optical afterglow of one of the most distant short ray gamma bursts, SGRB is the abbreviation, ever studied. Now, these are thought to actually result from the merger of two neutron stars. So these short gamma ray bursts are actually really cataclysmic events that are almost unfathomable in terms of their basic properties, because they're emitting huge amounts of energy in about 1 second. So these Gemini observations of this distant gamma ray burst, short gamma ray burst, now suggest that this process could occur surprisingly quickly for some systems. And this one was with the massive binary star system, which is actually surviving the supernova explosions to become neutron star binaries. Now, we will have the press release link in the video description, but the research was published in the Astrophysical Journal Letters. So if you have a subscription to that, please feel free to check out that press release. Okay, so you may have noticed this amazing image behind me, and this image was produced by none other than today's science guest, graphic designer, Joy Pollard. Joy. So while Joy's coming on screen, I'm going to go ahead and give just a bit of background about Joy. So, and if you can come on screen.
Oh, I think my video is working. Can you see me?
see here. Okay, yes, we can see you. So I'm going to talk about my background real quick. So I'm going to put my video back on, but I'm going to come back to you really quickly, Joy. But I wanted everyone to see you first. And then now I'm going to talk about this image as I introduce you, because this is one of the amazing things that, that our graphic designers can bring to us. So Joy Pollard moved to Hawaii from Alabama in 1990, where she went to Castle High School in Kaneohe and graduated from the University of Hawaii at Hilo with a BA in natural sciences in 1999. Now, following that time, she spent a while finding herself as an itinerant theater technician working all over the country, but primarily in Colorado, New York, and Massachusetts. But the call to come back home came while she was out, and she came back to the Big Island, and she started working as a planetarium technician. And I'm sure many of our guests have been to planetariums, and I know I have, and I really enjoy those shows. So Joy started out when she got back to Big Island as a planetarium technician, but then she eventually applied for an internship at Gemini Observatory in 2008. So over the past decade, she's pursued her passion for science, astronomy, and art, actually, by helping the observatory communicate the wonders of its discoveries to the world. Now, a little bit of interesting background about Joy. When she's not photographing the Gemini Observatory or creating amazing artist impressions of astronomical findings, Joy enjoys listening to podcasts, especially sci-fi and speculative fiction. So those of you in our YouTube audience, if you have any sci-fi or speculative fiction podcast recommendations for Joy, yeah, you can go ahead and leave those in the comments. Alyssa will just go ahead and let us know that. All right, Joy, over to you.
All right, thanks, Jamika. I would like to start with, how does one transition from theater to working at a world-class 8-meter telescope? Theater, telescope. The answer is, you don't know until you do it. I spent my career pursuing the things that were of interest to me: art, photography, theater. And then when the time came when I wanted to be closer to my family back in Hawaii, I happened to have accumulated the skill sets that would be relevant to the work ahead of me. And the skill sets that I didn't yet have, I was able to pick up and learn as I went. And as it turns out, you don't actually need to have a PhD in astronomy or astrophysics to work at an observatory, but a passion for science really helps. Gemini's statement of purpose is exploring the universe and sharing its wonders. And that's where I and the rest of the outreach team come in. We help to share the wonders of the universe with the world. But for this presentation in particular, I really want to share the wonder that is Gemini North and how you can explore it from the comfort of your own home. But before we get there, let's take a minute to talk about what the virtual tour is. Actually, Jamika, did you have a question for me?
Yes, Joy. So thank you, Alyssa, for pointing out that when I was introducing Joy, you, of course, were looking at Joy's amazing background, and you could not see this other amazing background that Joy has done. So Joy, if you could talk about this backdrop for us.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Gemini North. And then if you could proceed to your presentation, I'd appreciate it so much, because this is absolutely one of my favorite images.
Yeah, it's actually one of my favorite images too. In fact, it's a, Jamika, if you could actually stay up so that people could see it.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll talk about it. So that is Gemini North. It is a time-lapse sequence. So I set up a time-lapse camera and we captured a whole bunch of images and then we stacked them in Photoshop. And one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite images is because you can actually see the solar panels and very dimly reflecting the glow. It's lit up because there's some tail lights of a passing vehicle happen to light up Gemini. And you can find that image on the Astronomical Image of the Day, or APOD. I forget which year, I think it was 2014. But I'm sure we'll have that in the show notes. And of course, the image behind me is another one of my images as well. It's Comet Neowise. So I'm sure that's been in the news lately, and there are a couple of these. Also, Jason Chu has a nice one as well. Hi, Alyssa. Hi, Alyssa.
Hey, Joy. I just wanted to let you know that James Pollard has joined us in the chat, and he said, "Whoop whoop, you go, Joy."
Thanks, Jim. All right, so back to my presentation and the virtual tour. What is a virtual tour? So a virtual tour is a collection of photospheres, or a photo that wraps around a 360-degree sphere with you at the center. So everywhere you look, up, down, left, right, even behind you, you can see a complete scene with no edges. The photospheres are then connected to each other by a series of hotspots, allowing you to navigate your way around your virtual environment. Some of you may have been exploring these sorts of things more recently because of our current situation. So I encourage you to come and check out our virtual tour after I talk you through it. All right, so there are a lot of different methods and software packages that let you try this out yourself. But let's take a look at the method I used. I used a pano head similar to this one, which allows for the rotation of the camera on the focal point of the lens to stop at predefined nodes. And what you wind up with is something like this, capturing the complete scene with a total of 4 to 6 frames. 4 is the absolute minimum that you can capture with the full frame fisheye lens. 6 is better. 8 is like great, because then you can take up and down, but it takes a little more work to do that. Yes, Jamika.
So Joy, how is it that once you decide to, once you choose what you're going to start to photograph to begin the virtual experience, how do you decide to have 6 of these frames or 8? Is it just dependent on the weather? Does it depend on everything you're trying to gather? How's that decision made?
So typically speaking, 6 is the standard. There are some cases when I chose to do 4, because when you're capturing the night sky, or you want to include some natural phenomenon like the stars rotating, well, I don't want the stars to rotate while I'm taking a panoramic picture. I want them to stay in the same place. So you have to take the pictures relatively quickly. And if you take 6, you're more likely to induce some sort of rotation, especially because you need to expose for longer when you don't have as much light. But it's really kind of up to personal preference. And I don't do 8 because I am comfortable with my stitching software and the 360 actually being able to, I find I don't need the up and down photos. All right, any other questions, or shall I continue?
Oh, please continue.
Okay, I wasn't sure. All right, so anyways, what we have here is an example of what you might have with the 6 images. All right. So when you put this all together, after you clean it up, or rather digitally remove the tripod and stitch the images together, this is what you end up with. You might think that this image looks a little bit distorted because it's laid out flat, but once you view it mapped onto a sphere, it will look a lot more natural. So I want you to hold that thought, because we will come back to it later. Once you have all your photospheres built, it is simply a matter of linking them together via hotspots and adding other areas of interest with your software of choice. I built the original prototype with Annie over at ACM 360 Tours. I built the original prototype in Annie over at ACM 360 Degree Tour built the final version for us. Jamika, did you want to chime in?
Oh, yes, I was just waiting for you to finish that last thought, because yes, you're right. It does look, the image does look a bit warped. And so I'm glad you pointed out that this is a part of the process, that this is not something that indicates it's hasn't been done properly.
Absolutely. And honestly, those black bars that you see up and down, that's just because the image doesn't fit the 16:9 format that that is being pushed. But when you, it is a complete 360-degree panorama. So once it's wrapped on a sphere, it will look complete. There will be no black circles at the top and bottom.
Okay, and so how did you decide where to start your the virtual tour, and what are we looking at in here? Because there's a lot going on. What is this?
Right. So part of my job is to give actual tours. So I would take people up to the summit. Well, I would meet them at the summit and show them around the observatory. So I have a very good sense of the types of areas that are relevant and people might find interesting. So this is the actual telescope. Actually, I want to spend a little more time talking about what we're seeing when we can see it wrapped on a sphere, because it's not going to make a lot of sense to us right now. So we'll get back to that.
All right, you're our guide, Joy.
All right, so enough about the how-to. Let's take a little trip to the summit of Mauna Kea. And as I said before, feel free to follow along on your own device or visit it after we are done so you can explore on your own. We will put the link in the show notes if you come back later. So, and I will just read the URL for those of you who are listening. It's https://www.gemini.edu/virtual-gemini. All right. So Jamika, if you can give me a thumbs up if you can see the tour now on the screen.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right. So I'd like to start off by pointing out the true summit of Mauna Kea, Pu'uveku, rising to almost 14,000 feet above sea level. In this view, we could easily see why Mauna Kea is the gold standard by which all other astronomical sites are measured. The Big Island is formed by shield volcanoes rising up gently from the ocean, so that when the wind, which has been traveling for thousands of miles, reaches the slopes of Mauna Kea, it continues on a smooth, relatively speaking, flow, without introducing too much additional turbulence into the atmosphere. So I hope you can see my cursor, but this is Pu'uveku, the true summit of Mauna Kea. And Mauna Kea reaches so high that many of the clouds stay below the inversion layer, which makes for an average of more clear night skies that simply can't be beat anywhere else in the world. You can actually see the inversion layer here where the clouds are kind of trapped from going any higher. Also in the image behind me as well. If we rotate the scene a little bit, so we're going to take a trip, we're going to look this way. The scene, we can see the Gemini North Telescope. And all of these circles that are coming into view represent different pieces of information that you can click on and take a look at to find out more. Or you could follow one of them to one of the hotspots that will take you to one of the other scenes. But I'm going to let you explore more on your own before we have a peek inside. But before we have a peek inside, Jamika, did you have a question?
Yes. Joy, this is fascinating. So I have lots of questions. The first view you gave us was had the phrase Pu'uveku in it. For those of you, in our audience who don't know what the word Pu'u is or means in Hawaiian, what it refers to, could you tell us about that and then follow up with a little bit of information about the inversion layer that you referred to?
Sure. So bear in mind that as a tour guide, I memorize a lot of information. So some of my knowledge is only as deep as what I've needed to memorize. But what I can tell you from my understanding, and Alyssa, feel free to hop in here, but pu'u is the Hawaiian word for cinder cone. It also can mean other things, but generally speaking, when you refer to a pu'u, you mean cinder cone. And veku is this tiny little bug. I actually don't know what veku means, but it is the name of the narcissus bug that is endemic to Mauna Kea. And is only found up there. Does that sound about right, Alyssa?
Sounded great, Joy.
All right, thank you. So for the inversion layer, it's been a long time since I've studied this information, but basically there are layers in the atmosphere that are at different temperatures, and the cloud deck is only going to rise as high as that temperature will let it. And at a certain point, because of the different temperatures, it gets trapped and it can't rise any higher. Now, that's a very simplistic view of what the inversion layer is, and I'm sure that people who have more knowledge than me about it could talk more knowledgeably. So I'm going to stop right there.
That was perfect, Joy. Thank you. Just a little bit of insight for our audience. So,
yeah, no problem.
So as you were developing this this virtual tour, how did you decide what our first stop should be?
Oh, well, you know, Mauna Kea is a very special place, and I think it's important to highlight it first because that is the whole reason. If it weren't for Mauna Kea, we wouldn't be here. So that was important to me. And this scene with the laser, you know, that's kind of an iconic thing, and it's just very exciting for a lot of people. It's freaking laser beams.
Lasers to space.
Yeah, so we'll take a quick detour here and I'll show you the Keck Observatory is also lasing at this time. And just as I mentioned that you can look up, I will show you that we can look all the way up and watch the trail of the laser. That was the most challenging part of this particular photosphere, is making sure that that laser lined up in all those images.
Wow, that is incredible. That's beautiful. So tell us a little bit about how this works. So if we're moving our mouse and we're able to experience your simulated view of things moving, how does that actually work? How does that translate to us in the way that you're trying to get it across?
So if I think I understand your question, what you're saying is how does the computer know what you're looking at, I guess?
Exactly.
So, you know, that that technology is a little bit deeper than I am able to give a succinct answer to. However, my understanding is that the software, it has to do, it's a browser plugin, I think. I don't know, but basically, when you move the mouse, the computer knows, oh, you want to look here, you want to look there. The really cool thing, though, is if you have an iPad or it doesn't have to be Mac, it could be Android. You have a phone, a smartphone, you can use that to visit the tour. And if you have your accelerometers enabled, you can literally point your device where you want to look. And it's like you're looking through a window at the scene. So it's really cool.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're with you. Tell us more about how you created this virtual tour. This is fascinating.
All right, so continuing right along, we're gonna go ahead into the observatory because we've been out here in the cold for a while. That's the nice thing about doing this virtually. We don't have to deal with the cold or the lack of oxygen. We're gonna step inside.
Oh, that's a really good point you brought up. I'm really glad you said that, because you told us that you do, when we were open, do some tours, some actual tours. So you mentioned about oxygen. Is that sometimes needed for people who go to the summit on your tours?
Yeah, so there's about I forget, it's been so long since I've done this that I don't have the facts at the tip of my head, but it's about 20% less than what you're used to. That's not the right number, but it's not that there's less oxygen in the air, it's that there's less partial pressure. So your body is not able to absorb as much of the available oxygen. So your heart is working harder, you're working harder, and it tires you out. So there's a whole slew of things that can affect you due to high altitude and that partial pressure and not being able to absorb as much oxygen. So it is possible to visit the summit as long as you acclimatize for a period of time before going up. But then at the halfway level, but you still might need a little bit of supplemental oxygen. Generally speaking, though, if you need oxygen, it's time to come down. So, all right. We are now in the entryway to the observatory, and we're actually not going to spend a whole lot of time here. This is just kind of a segue into the next, because we want to take a look at some of the other things we can see. The entryway is not too exciting. There are a few different choices, but we are going to go to the coding chamber. All right. This might look a little weird to you, so we'll go ahead and rotate the scene a bit so we can see what's going on. There we go. All right, we are going to check out the coding chamber. Since I rotated the scene, you can see what looks like an awful lot like an escapee from Area 51. The coding chamber is where we recode our 8-meter mirror. The mirror itself is a single piece of zero-door ultra-low expansion glass. Just like the mirrors that you have at home, this mirror must be coated with a reflective surface. But unlike the mirrors you have at home, the Gemini primary mirror is coated on top of the glass. This helps with the reflectivity needed for the precise astronomical observations, but because it is exposed to air, it periodically needs to be resurfaced or recoated. There's other issues as well, the exposure. Anyways, the Gemini mirrors primarily require recoating maybe every 4 to 5 years. This is less often than most traditionally coated mirrors because Gemini uses a special recipe of protected silver rather than aluminum. This silver coating also helps Gemini see in the infrared part of the spectrum. For the coating, there are 3 layers which are applied by magnetrons in a process known as sputtering. So the thing is that silver doesn't like to stick to glass, so you need an adhesive layer. So they first put down a layer of nickel chromium. Then they put down the silver, and then they need to protect it somehow. So you put down another adhesive layer of nickel chromium, and finally a very thin layer of silica to protect it.
So Joy, if I can ask a question here, you mentioned that we actually using silver. How much silver are we talking about, and how is it obtained?
Oh, how it's obtained, you'd have to ask someone else because I have no idea about that part of it. I've never thought to ask that question. So let's see, if you were to scrape up all that silver and say, let's take it down to the local pawn shop, I don't recommend that, but you would wind up with, let's say a soda can amount of silver. And that's not a solid soda can, that's like as if a soda can were made of silver. That's how much silver, so it's not a lot of silver.
And that's enough to properly coat the mirror?
That's right, and that's because the thickness of that coating is really, really thin. It is, if you take all those layers and put them together, it's between 1/100th to 1/1000th the thickness of a human hair. So really, 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 really thin. And so I'm going to, I'm about ready to move on. Is there any other questions about the coating chamber before we move on?
No, all good.
All right.
You're our tour guide on this virtual tour, Joy, as you talk about the process you used to create this tour and give us some highlights of cool places to spot. So we're with you. All
right, sounds good. So now that we have taken a look at how we recode our mirror, and this is kind of just a highlights of the tour. There's a lot more that we're not going to be getting into that we won't have time to get into. But we will go ahead and go back to our main entryway. And we are going to go to the telescope, the star of the show. All right. Now, this might look familiar to you. Sorry, I got a little distracted. Okay, I lost myself in my notes. All right. Remember I told you to hold the thought of how a flat image might look once it's wrapped on a sphere.
Yep, well, I remember that.
Yeah. So now we are looking at the same image we saw earlier as it appeared in the virtual tour, as it appears in the virtual tour. As we explore the scene, we can see how the way the image was stretched and warped makes a lot more sense once it is viewed in this environment. I should pause for a moment to say that this is actually set up or capable to be supported by VR as well. So if you have a VR headset, you can also explore it that way as well.
Oh, wow. So if any of our participants now who are joining us in our YouTube audience, if you decide to don your VR headset and have a real virtual experience with our tour, definitely let us know about that in the comments.
Absolutely.
Right? Pointing that out.
Yeah. All right, so looking at the telescope itself, I should mention that the telescope is named for Frederick Dillett. He was a pioneer in infrared astronomy. Unfortunately, he did pass away, but that was why we named our telescope after him. Anyways, the telescope has 5 instruments mounted on the back at any one time. Those 5 instruments include the acquisition and guidance and a slew of spectrographs and imagers. Because these instruments are continuously mounted on the back, and if you're wondering, I guess I can point out these are the instruments here. There's one on the up-looking port. There's another one up here on this port, and there's some over here. And of course, this is our adaptive optics instrument. Under ideal conditions, because of this setup, the Gemini telescope can switch from taking data on one target, SLU, and start taking data on another target, again, under ideal conditions, in about 5 minutes. That's really fast. And that is super critical when you have a target of opportunity that may only be visible for a few minutes at most. All right. So finally, to wrap up our little telescope tour preview, we will take another view of the start of what it might look like at the start of the night. So this is just before the telescope would start to get ready for observations. From this vantage point, we're actually on the back of the dome. We can view the full telescope. We can see the mirror, and we can see the open vent gates and a couple of our staff members for scale.
Joy, real quick, this is a breathtaking view from the inside of the dome. So this is the beginning of the observing night. What time does that usually start when our operators start to prepare for the evening's observing?
I can try and field the answer to that question. However, I should say that since I'm not an operator or science staff, I don't have intimate knowledge with how that works. But my understanding is that typically they like to get started around sunset or not long after. The reason for this is we don't want to shine the sunlight on the telescope, bad for instruments. And also, of course, the things that we want to see are the faint objects that are in the night sky. So, you know, as it's starting to get dark, as we're in twilight, that's when they'll start taking these things called flats. And don't ask me what flats are. I know that's coming next. My understanding of flats is that they are a way to kind of settle out the noise, try and get an idea of what things are so that you can figure out what things should look like. And that's a really bad explanation. Hopefully another guest in the future can give a better one.
Oh, that's all good. As we're looking here, the people look tiny.
I know, right? That's Peter Michaud. I'll call him out right there. And I think that's actually, I don't remember who that is. Could be John, but I'm not sure. All right.
So anyways. I love the perspective that we're getting, this view that you're showing us on the tour. How do you decide where you want to take the images from as you're coming up with the components of the virtual tour?
Well, it has a lot to do with a lot of experience. So I have taken film crews up, and I know where they like to shoot from. So knowing that, I also I take the time to talk with our engineers and our staff members to ask them, you know, what they think would be good. And I work with them to come up with these spots. You know, I never want to be someplace that's not going to be safe or that's going to make our crew feel unsafe. So there's a lot of back and forth on that.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear that kind of collaboration is going on, but especially for the safety purposes. All right, so we'll continue listening to you. I won't ask any more questions. I'm sorry, this is so interesting.
No, not at all. Uh-oh, I just lost everything. Hold on. Okay, there we go, we're back. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the vent gates. So these are the open structures here. Now, this big slit right here, let's see, we'll stop the movement. I thought it might be kind of interesting to have some auto rotation, but it's a little distracting. So this is the observing slit. Hopefully you can see my cursor circling around. And this opening along the sides, these are the vent gates. The vent gates can be fully open to about, I think, 3 stories tall. The importance of the vent gates is it allows the atmosphere from outside of the observatory to enter. And that means that you're not going to have a different temperature air inside the dome than outside the dome. And that's critical because light travels through different temperatures of air at different speeds, and that induces distortion. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. All right, so I need to find myself in my notes here. Okay, so did you, oh yes, Alyssa.
Alyssa!
Hey Joy, we have a couple of comments in the chat here, and it looks like Tom Jabal mentioned that there are companies from which you can buy ultra pure silver, something like 99.999% pure, and the layer on the Gemini primary mirror is several hundreds of silver atoms thick.
Oh, that's an awesome answer. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
And in addition to that, we do have a couple of guests who said they received tours from you in person, and even one person who was part of the Gemini Observatory experience. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we were doing, and by I say were, this was pre-COVID, we were hosting state residents, Gemini specifically once every quarter, but all of the Mauna Kea observatories participate in the Kama'aina Observatory experience. And that is an opportunity for state residents. You basically just need a state ID to be able to come up and have a insider's look at all of the observatories, 2 at a time, I think it's once a month. So it's the 3rd Saturday of every month. You know, I think it's 24, somewhere between 24 and 48 people, depending on what the interest is. And then we take those residents, well, when I say we, I mean the people who run the Kama'aina Observatory experience. We'll meet them up at Halepohaku. They would get a meal. They would get an orientation on the cultural significance of Mauna Kea, as well as you know, how to we want to preserve it, and also some of the scientific findings, the recent findings that have been happening on the mountain. And then they get to go inside the telescopes led by tours by the staff. And each time it's two observatories. So Gemini often pairs with the Canada, France, Hawaii telescope. And then, yeah, and then they get, I forget, it's been a while since I've been a part of it. And I'm really hoping that we get to start hosting people at the summit again, because it's been a very long time since we've had an actual tour.
Yeah, thank you so much for that explanation about the KOE, or the Kama'aina Observatory experience, and the tours in general. And I have to say thank you, all of you who are in the audience, who adding your comments that you appreciated having a tour with Joy. That just makes us so happy, because I have also been on the receiving end of a tour from Joy multiple times, and it is always informative every time. So we are glad that y'all have enjoyed those tours, and we look forward to being able to have y'all visit again soon. All right, Joy, please continue.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you, Alyssa.
It is difficult to condense everything that I would normally talk about in a tour into 20, 30 minutes. But yeah, so I was wrapping up, I think. I did want to mention that Gemini is a Q telescope, and that means that there are several different potential plans for the night, optimizing for the sky conditions and what is visible in the sky at any given moment. This allows Gemini the flexibility to continue to try to execute an observation for the whole semester if for some reason they are not able to complete it at a specific time. Other classical-based models of observing mean that if you are weathered out during your observation, you are out of luck and would need to apply for time. You would need to reapply for time. All right, so we need to go back to my slideshow here. I know we're coming up on the end of this, but I did want to give you a sneak peek because NOIRLab is planning to launch a few more of these virtual type tours. And I haven't actually completed anything yet, except I have stitched together a few of those flat images. So
We like sneak peeks, Joy. So those of you who are with us today, we're going to get something special. All right, we're ready, Joy. We're ready.
So this first image is the McMath Solar Telescope on Kitt Peak. It is not currently in operations. They're working on converting it into a visitor center, but it's still a very iconic facility. And again, what we're looking at, because I should tell you, this is not a curved building, okay? It is a solid diagonal. It is curved because of the flattening of the curvature from the sphere. But the really mind-bending image is the one that I took from inside. So this is what it looks like during the day. The other photo was a nighttime photo. But this bright end up at the top, that is the top of the telescope pointing towards the sky, normally at the sun. And then the other end of the telescope down here, that's actually pointing straight down into the earth. So even though it looks like it's curving, this is actually just a straight line. And it all has to do with perspective. So at some point, we will have this part of a new tour for Kitt Peak as part of NOIRLab's virtual programming. All right, if there aren't any, oh, there's Alyssa, Jamika.
Yes, so there's so much going on. So you're saying that, in fact, it's not curved when we're looking on the outside. It only appears like that because of the perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, it definitely looks curved to me.
So remember, we are in the center. I mean, think of a ball, and you are in the center of that ball, just floating. There's no gravity. You're just in the center of that ball, and the photograph is wrapped completely around you, and you can look up, you can look down. And so if you take that sphere, and you lay it out flat, you're going to see something like this. It doesn't work perfectly. You know, if you've ever looked at a globe and they try to represent it, it doesn't. Things are stretched. You know, so it's not a one-to-one thing. But it's how it gets represented when you lay it out flat, if I'm saying that correctly.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm glad you were able to explain it a little bit, because I definitely know, and I'm sure many of our audience do too, because they take photographs on our phones and all of that. That perspective makes a huge difference. So thank you for explaining that.
All right, well, I don't think I have anything more to add on the tour. So I just like to end with one of my artist interpretations. So I hope you enjoyed our quick virtual visit to Gemini North Telescope. I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in. I really appreciate that. I also want to thank Jamika. Thank you, and Alyssa, thank you very much for hosting and moderating. And I'll just say, I don't have a lot to say about this. I think we'll leave a link to it in the show notes. I listen to a lot of podcasts to find out more. But what I can tell you is this is an exoplanet around an M dwarf star.
Excellent, Joy. Thank you so much. Before I ask a few questions about this, and we're going to bring in the fact that today is actually World Photo Day. I'm going to talk about that real quick. Let's check in with Alyssa. Alyssa, how are you doing out there in the YouTube live chat?
It looks like we have some comments on the pictures being amazing and beautiful.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
It's always nice to hear.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely, it is. Absolutely. So, Joy, we're going to keep your video up here as we talk about this image. So, tell us again what these two objects are first.
Yeah, so this bright thing down here at the bottom, in the lower left, that is that is representative of an M dwarf star. So I painted that, created it, and it was lots of fun. And then over here, the big large object, that is I want to say it's Neptune sized. I haven't looked at the press release. And you know, honestly, you work with it. You work with the scientists to try and make it as accurate as possible. But then you're on to the next project. So trying to remember exactly all of the details sometimes can be a little tricky. So I don't want to say the wrong thing and then, you know, it's like, oops, yeah, that was wrong. And so I'd rather not get too much into the science of it. But what I do remember though is that we did want to include these white clouds. Because we wanted it, I think it's a warm Neptune. I think it was a Neptune, and we wanted to include these white puffy clouds. I think because it was representative of something, and I don't want to say because I don't want to say the wrong thing.
No worries, no worries. We're not trying to put you too on the spot here, Joy. Thank you. So you brought in some details that I was actually going to ask you about. So first, when you're first going to create a kind of an artist impression here to better visually communicate whatever the press release is trying to get across to us, to the people reading it, how do you work with the PI first to come up with their ideas of what it should look like? And then do you work with your graphics team? What's that process like?
Well, it's a little bit different every time. Oftentimes it comes out of some kind of a news team meeting where we discuss the upcoming, what we think might be press releases. And then we say, oh, you know, we get some information from the PI saying what kind of graphic they think would be interesting or would be representative of what they are trying to get across. And so then there'll usually be several iterations. I often like to start with a very basic kind of a geometry where that shows the relative positions and sizes and without a whole lot of detail. So like things like the stars and interstellar kind of media, that's kind of like the last thing that I work on. I like to work more on the getting as much of the information that we know about correct, or you know, sometimes it is a little bit of an interpretation, because sometimes the perspective isn't exactly true to reality or how it would be, but it's more interesting, you know, visually to see it represented this way. So, yeah, there is that as well.
Okay, so that makes sense. So you're in a sense doing, I think this is the right phrase, some storyboarding, right? So you're kind of doing a little bit of prep work, laying out visually how you think it should look to convey what the
in some instances, yes. In some instances, yes. I did a comic which has not yet come out, and also the one that you showed at the start, that was also I kind of did a little bit of a storyboardish sort of a thing for that, because there's a video that goes along with that. But usually it's more prototyping, more quick sketches, more just getting some rough ideas about what I want to do, and showing them to the PI and saying, what do you think about this? And then getting the feedback from them, and then going back and forth and making sure that what they're trying to get across is being represented well. And also, you know, working with the graphics team, you know, making sure that, hey, have you done this before? Did you have any recommendations, or, you know, would you like to suggest anything? You know, Pete Marenfeld is also a very talented designer, and he does a lot of our artwork as well. So I'll often, you know, bounce ideas off of him if it's something that I haven't worked on before, especially.
That's fantastic that you know, you and your team that you're on. Of course, we hope this, and we see that this is what you're saying, that you work to help support each other so that you're all learning and growing together as you put out amazing images that stun those of us who look at them like me. Okay, so I know that you have your degree, one of your degrees in natural sciences. And so does that background help you at all as you're coming up with these, you know, these ideas? Because, for example, you said here, the star is it's an M dwarf. Well, I know our sun is a G2V type star. So how does that compare to an M dwarf, right? Obviously the M dwarf is smaller, but you need a little bit of kind of astronomical background knowledge. Did you get enough of a basis when you were studying in university, or did you pick up a lot of it as you did your work and you're working with your team and the various things that you've done?
So yes, I did take some astronomy courses as part of my degree. And I really enjoyed it, and I really got a lot out of it, and it gave me a good base on astronomy. That was like 20 years ago. So there have been a lot of changes in astronomy since then. And it's also been a while since I've studied it. So it's not as if I have really kept up necessarily. So I depend a lot on fellow staff members, not necessarily the PI all the time. Like I will definitely make sure that what I'm doing is what they want me to do. But sometimes just getting initial ideas of where to start, I will go to one of our other science staff and just kind of bounce ideas off of them, because they are they're very knowledgeable in their field. They're the experts, and they don't steer me wrong. So I'm very grateful to have their input for those sorts of things.
Yes, we appreciate all of our staff. Absolutely, thank you.
Well, without the science staff, I wouldn't have any pretty images to make. So
that's so true. Absolutely, that's a good point to highlight. Absolutely. And as we are wrapping up, we have Alyssa back from YouTube Live Land. Alyssa, what do you have for us?
This is a great transition because speaking of staff that we work with a lot in communications and in science and in the beautiful art that Joy creates, one of our staff members has helpfully inputted what exactly this image is. So
of course.
So it does represent a young exoplanet that is unusually dense for its size and age.
That's right. Now I remember.
Slightly smaller than Neptune, and it orbits the M dwarf star in 3.5 days.
Very good. I really appreciate, those are the kinds of things. My focus, my area of expertise is, being able to give tours, take pictures of the telescope, and create the artwork. And so I certainly would not be able to do my job as well if I didn't have the support of all of our staff members. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that, because it's important to get the right information out there.
Absolutely, it is. Thank you so much. And as always, we appreciate all staff, any NOIRLab staff coming and supporting us and our live from NOIRLab. When we're doing our live from NOIRLab presentations, it's that kind of support is absolutely valuable. And thank you so much. Okay, so those of you in YouTube Live and the YouTube Live audience, we appreciate so much your questions and comments. We have a few more minutes to send a few things in if you'd like for our science guest today, graphic designer Joy Pollard of the International Gemini Observatory, a program of NSF's NOIRLab. All right, so as we wrap up, I'll do a quick check-in with Alyssa in a second, but it is World Photo Day, Joy. So Joy, if you're a photographer, I imagine that for like a World Photo Day, that this is something that highlights one of your passions. Can you tell us just maybe in a 30 seconds, real quick, what actually got you into photography, and why did you connect with it so much?
Wow. I started doing photography in high school. Actually, even before that, I think my dad gave me one of these old, where you crank the film and you take the picture and you have to do the focus and the aperture. And so, I did black and white photography, and it was just being able to capture the world and then take that film and then, develop it yourself and be able to create a reality that is unique to you, right? It's not just because photography isn't just representing faithfully what's there, it's also what you see, because everyone has their own point of view, and you can't see what other people see, except in photography you can kind of try and recreate that, right? You're letting other people into your vision, and that's, I think, one of the appeals to me, is that you can create something and share what you see with other people.
Well said. Well said. Yes, absolutely. And I certainly, on the receiving end of some of your amazing images, I can definitely tell you that is definitely a good way to describe my experience of these amazing images. It's being able to see your view, what you're trying to convey to us, which is pretty amazing. Thank you so much. All right, so last 5 minutes before I get to the last slide, our quick check-in with Alyssa. Any other follow-up comments or questions for Joy?
None for now, but Joy has done an amazing job with all of her artwork and will continue to do great things with NOIRLab.
Thank you, Alyssa. I have one thought that I do want to mention, and that is, I mentioned doing tours, and I should also say that we wouldn't be able to do the tours without the support and help of the day crew as well. And of course we wouldn't be able to do our mission without the day crew. So I've been shouting out to the science staff, but it is a group effort, right? Without the telescope, there would be no observing. So we need people, highly trained, highly skilled folks who can actually keep the telescope working at its peak. So, and every time I've had the opportunity to take people up to the summit to show the telescope, everyone is always very gracious, and it's I hate to say it, it's a wonderful place to work.
That is definitely good to hear. Okay.
And if I have one more minute, if there aren't any other questions, I will say, growing up in Hawaii, I didn't realize that these world-class observatories were even here. I think we're doing a little bit better about getting people aware of that, but at the same time, it didn't even occur to me that I could do something that I was passionate about and that I love while still living, here. And I think it's important to know that just because you didn't pursue math, or you didn't go and do the hard math, that doesn't mean that you can't still do something like this. So take a moment and think about your passions and see where they take you. Don't let yourself be bounded by what you think you can't do.
Joy, that is the perfect note to end on. Absolutely. Yes, we appreciate that encouragement for sure, because as we're learning, working at NOIRLab, everyone's contribution is absolutely vital, and all of the various skills and experiences that we all bring from our various backgrounds and perspectives and expertise really go a long way to help create the overall experience that we're hoping to share with not only our virtual audience, but when we actually can see people again in person with them as well too. So thank you so much. All right, so on our last slide, wrapping up here, we have 2 minutes. What I would definitely like to do is let you all know that I'm sorry I left off our host's name here on this slide, and that is absolutely my fault, and I apologize. Next Wednesday, we have, again, live from NOIRLab, but this is our Spanish version. So in vivo desde NOIRLab with Manuel Paredes. So it'll be at the same time. So this is 10 a.m. HST, 1 p.m. MST, if you would like to join us. And it'll be right here on our NOIRLab YouTube channel. And so feel free to definitely join us, whether you are a Spanish speaker or not, because it's always interesting and engaging. And we very much appreciate y'all joining us. So thank you again. here from the Big Island of Hawaii, the International Gemini Observatory, a program of NSF's NOIRLab. We want to thank you for joining us once again for Live from NOIRLab at Gemini. Have a fabulous rest of your Wednesday, and I will leave our last words again with our science guest today, graphic designer Joy Pollard. Joy.
Thanks again for allowing me into your YouTube. Feel free to drop some comments if you have questions or some of those podcast recommendations. And until the next time, hui hou.
Hui hou.